trying to record this for the people on video.
Yes.
We are going to attempt this, and if we don't make it, that's okay. We got the audio, and I record them separately. So I don't rely on Zoom's.
Yeah.
Actually, they have great audio, really.
Hmm.
So anyway, enough about that. Let's get down to business here. Let's talk resumes, and um, there's a lot of places I would love to start. But I think what I'm beginning to see is a trend. A lot of resume writers are starting to take away the resume aspect of their business and insert the word personal branding, thus kind of making it synonymous. And maybe you could talk about the reason why people should look at resumes and personal branding as sort of the same, one of the main components that they need for the job search.
Yeah, personal branding and resumes are pretty much one and the same. Your resume is a reflection of your experience, how you add value, what you're known for, and that's very intertwined with your brand. So your resume really just becomes a reflection of that personal brand, and that becomes very crucial to your job search, because when
Mhm.
you're putting your information in front of employers, they need to be able to see how you add value, how you're going to benefit them, and what's different about you compared to everybody else who may have similar qualifications as you.
Mhm. Now, is that, or, but people don't naturally approach it that way because I guess there's been this space of personal branding, and then there's resumes, and even though it's separate but equal, people don't really insert their personal brand in their resumes like they should.
No, and I think a lot of it is probably just inexperience. They don't know what they're supposed to put in their resume. I think a lot of people get hung up on it has to be a career history or has to list my duties and responsibilities, and they're not thinking about the bigger picture. And I think a lot of it really comes down to a lack of knowledge or a lack of education about what hiring managers and recruiters are looking for on a resume.
Yeah, yeah, they're more concerned about how to do it than how to say
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, and they're really concerned about mistakes. There's a lot of people I've been talking to lately, and that's their biggest challenge when it comes to writing their resume is they're worried about making mistakes, not using the right wording, not keeping it clear and concise, how to remember all the information that needs to go on it.
Mhm. So really, people should just write at first, at least to get it off their chest and to get it out, and then they can go back and create a pathway later.
I think so. And I think a lot of it starts with asking questions. There's a lot of questions that you need to ask yourself to be able to go back and incorporate your personal brand into your resume and to really make sure that your resume is very forward focused on what your next career goals are. And that really, those questions that you ask will help define that direction for your resume.
hmm And the good writers, and the experienced writers of resumes, and perhaps the ones that are doing it professionally, who are really doing it for a living, have all kinds of questions prepared
Mm,
that people can really ask and
yep.
make a part of it. And one of the things that people should look for, you have an infographic that's
Oh,
fantastic, 127 resume tips that
yeah.
people can use. And it's not what people think it is. It's not like my document where I have a document that's 219 job search tips. That's really out there somewhere. But that serves a different purpose. For you, it makes it a whole lot easier for people just to scan
Yeah.
and find the things that are relevant to them and to be able to use it for their resume.
That's right. Yeah. When I created it, I wanted to break it up by each different element and section of a resume so that people could just go to that section that they were having trouble with, look at the tips and see what they needed to do when they were writing their resume. And a lot of the sections that are on there, people don't even think about when
Mhm.
they're writing their resume. And I really wanted it to be completely comprehensive. So it covered everything from their name at the top of their resume till, the education and certifications at the very bottom of their resume.
Sure, sure. Are you sure you didn't give away the shop when you did that? I mean, give away all the secrets?
I might have just done it all, but that's okay. I mean, if it helps somebody,
But
that's what it's all
but
about.
but there's a point to that, is that it's not a matter of how many tips you have, it's being able to contextualize it and make it so that it does accurately brand the person that's writing it.
Right. That's exactly right.
So that could be a tough deal to kind of sort through a lot of those tips and things. But people shouldn't really start to look for tips. They should start to look for meaning and value out of their own experience.
That's exactly right. Yep. And a lot of people miss that. They miss the part about how do I add value? How do I bring benefits to the employer? How do I solve those big pain points and problems that the employer has? And a lot of people miss that framework when they're writing their resume, and then their resume doesn't have that same impact and that same impression that they really want to make with employers.
Right. And actually, the work is not particularly in writing the actual resume. The work is being able to parse all of it to make it comprehensive enough to capture in one snapshot their own value.
Right. And being clear. I think a lot of people struggle with the clarity.
Yeah, I really do think that that's a really big one. Um, and making it simple enough for the reader to understand. I think people really just don't connect with the simplicity, making it simple enough, because they feel like they've read somebody's resume and they have all this jargon and don't realize that the jargon makes sense, but without thinking, you're thinking, oh, this is so impressive.
Yes. Yep. And a lot of people don't even care about that. I mean, there's something to be said about including keywords, but when you're using all of that fluffy stuff, employers don't care about any of that.
Right, right. Functional keyword usage, I like to call it.
Yes.
I don't know if that makes any sense,
Yes.
but
Yep.
uh,
Yep.
I think that that connects a little bit better.
Yep. Absolutely. That totally makes sense. Yeah. There's a big difference in keywords. What some people think are keywords are not.
Right, right. Now let's talk a little bit about something that is practiced amongst the professional resume writers. And again, we're talking about the great ones. Is that there's a team behind writing a resume.
Yeah.
You have a team.
I do.
And probably every resume writer I've had over the past few years, they all have teams. It's not something that people have to do by themselves, and probably should stop doing by themselves, and to put a little bit more thought of who can actually add components of the resume to make it more robust and make it more relevant, and relevant to to the employer.
Right. Yep. That's exactly right. And we do have teams. We have writers who specialize in different industries, and then we have full-time copy editors, and their job is to proof the resumes and the documents after the writers and the clients have worked on them. That way we make sure that they're flawless, that they
Mhm.
don't have any of those mistakes and spelling and grammar errors. And I mean, we check everything. We check the names of places of employment to make sure they were spelled correctly, client names, just anything and everything you can think of. We're going back and we're checking it to make sure that it's perfect.
Right. And not to veer too far off, but that's the biggest difference between a really good resume writing service or a resume writer and one that's doing it for $49 over the
Right.
internet. That there are people who are checking multi-tier components and sections of your resume, as opposed to one who's just trying to give you a document to hand in to an employer.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that's one of the big differences. The other thing you see a lot is templates and
Mhm.
questionnaires, like canned phrases, things like that. You'll see that a lot with the lower level services versus a conversation and someone who's listening and trying to understand your work history and what your career goals are. That's
Mhm.
another big difference too.
And funny you should bring templates up, because there seem to be more templates coming out of the woodwork in recent years, especially this year, and probably in the past few months. If I'm not, some social network, it might be LinkedIn, that or I know Microsoft has always had templates, but
Yeah.
somebody had a template, and there was somebody that was raving about it. And is there such thing as a good template?
Ooh, I think it depends on what you mean by template. If you mean a pre-created resume that is set for a certain position and contains kind of these blanket statements or general statements that apply to certain jobs, or it's the same format, I
Hmm.
think you're kind of treading into dangerous waters when you do that, because it waters down your brand. You no longer cease to be unique in the marketplace, but you're conforming to what everyone else is doing. And that really just waters down your personal brand and the effect that your resume has. So that's why we just, veer far away from templates with resumes, because I feel
Right.
like it just does more damage than it does good. But that's not to say that you couldn't go hire a professional to do a really great visual design. I think there's a difference between that, like if you went on like Etsy or one of the design sites, and you really wanted your resume to have a specific visual appeal and look to it. I think that to me is different than grabbing some pre-made templates off of the internet and using the same wording and things in there.
Right. And they could be kind of problematic too with the applicant tracking system, correct?
Hmm. Yeah, it really just depends on what you're doing, because some applicant tracking systems are a lot more finicky than others.
Yeah. Yeah. I got to, this may be a little off topic, and I might be veering a little bit to the left, but I've got to ask anyway. Um, how are the organic use versus like some of the software that claims to being able to scan for keywords? Um, Particularly when I say organic, I mean the way that you do it, in essence, as opposed to there's a lot of people say that a lot of services that are using scanning now. I mean, outside of Jobscan, which has been
Yeah.
proven to have a really useful scan,
Hmm.
there are other services that are beginning to use scan, but it's not quite the same as far as scanning and looking for keywords and being able to use that to move a resume forward from the applicant tracking system. Have you gotten feedback from your clients in using those, or from your experience yet?
I know that there's a lot of resume writers, and even us, we use Jobscan. I mean, it's a great resource. Like, we'll go in and input a client's resume and the types of positions that they're targeting to double check our own work, to
Hmm.
make sure that we are using the right keywords and we're targeting it the way that we need to. And we even tell our clients, when you're customizing your resume, this is a great tool to use. I have not had any experience personally with any others, but I have clients that will go take a resume and put it in one, and then they'll come back and they'll say, I got this generic feedback, what do you think? And then we have to, kind of educate and say, well,
Right.
it's really not accurate, or it's not what they're looking for. And normally it's tied to a service who's using it to make money.
Hmm.
They're trying to siphon in people so that they can offer resume writing services or resume builders or whatever, the case may be. So,
Right. Right. Um, how about the old-fashioned word cloud, software?
yeah.
Like the work, like back in the day, I think we used a lot of what was it, WordNet.com, or this
Yeah.
were a bunch of them where there were
Hmm.
cloud services, and they highlighted keywords. And I don't think most of them did not really work the way that you would think that they would work. But are those still useful for resume, when people are writing their resumes, to highlight keywords, or do you think that might be a little outdated?
And I think it's okay. I mean, I think it's a tool you could use. I wouldn't put all my eggs in that one basket, but
Hmm.
and it could go both ways. I mean, you could take a job description off the internet and put it in there and see what words pop up the most, and then use that to make sure that you incorporate those same keywords into your resume. But I think essentially it has the same effect as what JobScan would have, but JobScan's probably a little more tailored to the resume writing process as opposed to word cloud. But I think there's a lot of value in word clouds. I
Mhm.
personally use them when I do surveys, like if I survey clients or I survey just people out in the market. Whenever I send out the surveys and I get the results back in, there's a little word cloud feature, and it shows me a visual of the most used words in the survey, and it helps me to put context to what all of those people are saying. So I do think there's some value in it. I just wouldn't put, you know, all stock in one area.
Right, right. Let's talk grammar for a hot second, and proofreading, because that's a big deal too. Um,
Yeah.
um, I said in a comment yesterday on someone's post that, you know, that even with typos, people can bypass uh, the process with a referral, because you have somebody to vouch for is real. But for the other parts of just code trying to get through the process, grammar does matter a great deal. And even people who are executives, for whatever reason, with their education level and MBAs, there are mistakes and typos, and that's one of the reasons why a team effort is really great, is to get that proofreading part right.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So, one of the tools that I like to use, and I do it all the time in my own writing because I don't always have time to send things to my editor, is
Mhm.
Grammarly.
Yeah.
So, you can use their app, and it also integrates with social media sites, which I think is, excuse me, really important when you're leaving social media updates, just to have that extra check to make
Yes.
sure, because those recruiters and hiring managers and employers are going to LinkedIn to research you. They're going to find you on Twitter or Facebook. So it's good to have that, as a backup. And that's definitely one way, one tool that I would use. And then, if you're not going to hire a professional to write your resume or have an editor proofread it, then, we always tell people, have 3 friends look at it and proof
Mhm.
it to see, what they catch that maybe you wouldn't catch because you're just used to, writing. You've probably been looking at it so much that, now you don't see the same mistakes and errors and things like that. But, it's really important because one spelling and grammar mistake can cost you a great opportunity. I mean, it's kind of sad that it comes down to just one little mistake, but I mean, it's the
Yes.
reality.
Yes. And there are many different types of mistakes, and not necessarily even a spelling mistake, but even using like homonyms, like meat versus meat,
Mm-hmm.
or
Yeah.
things like that could really be a
Yeah.
trip up. And definitions of not using the wrong word in the wrong context. And
Yeah.
someone, I have a friend in HR who says that is even, that's almost as common as a spelling error, that people use a word and it doesn't mean what they think it means.
Yeah.
And and but a Grammarly doesn't always catch that.
Yes.
Yeah, so it does help to have that human touch part of it, which makes all the difference in the world. I use a human editor.
Yes.
I've shared times on the show. Shout out to Susan Rooks, the grammar goddess.
Oh, yes.
She does a lot of my editing for my articles on from various platforms.
Very
Um,
good.
but yeah, I think that's pretty important to have. So going in another direction,
Okay.
and boy, I'm really finding the right questions for you today. Didn't expect to ask as many questions as I had. Um,
That's okay.
yeah. So, how do you decide who your audience is when you're writing your resume, or how does someone figure that part out? And I ask that because people, it's they have a hard time getting down to it. They think the industry is the audience when
Yeah.
there's different sub audiences within those audiences.
Yes, yeah, there actually is a lot of audiences. So I don't know that most people would consider applicant tracking software an audience, but I think that's probably one of them. And then, You have the hiring manager, the entry-level hiring manager, who's going to be doing the initial scan of your resume probably. And then you have recruiters, and then you have the actual person that you're going to be reporting to, who you're going to do your interview with, who's going to review your resume before you get the interview. So there's a lot of different audiences that your resume has to speak to.
Yeah. So there's been arguments for ages about, should I customize my resume, and how many customizations are required to submit, since there are so many different audiences regarding that. Your view on this?
Yeah, I feel like a broken record when it comes to telling people to customize their resume, because I feel like I'm always preaching that to people. You know, even if you get it professionally written and you're applying to different positions with different companies, it's really important that you make those small customizations. And it doesn't mean that you have to rewrite your resume every time you apply to a different company or a different job. It just means that there are certain things on your resume that need to be tweaked and adjusted depending on the company, the position title, the culture of the company, which is a big thing right now because everybody is just, you know, talking about culture fit all over the place. So yeah, customizations are really important. And I think a lot of people just don't even consider that when they're writing their resume.
Right. So how deeply should somebody research in, of course, your suggestion is, for the most part, you're going to customize your resume at least somewhat for every company that you apply to.
Yeah. Yeah, I would definitely recommend that. Yeah, absolutely. So here's a couple things. You want to change the position title at the top of your resume and gear it towards the type of role that you're applying to. So, you know, in one company, it might be a project manager, and one company, it might be a product manager. So make sure that whatever the position is that you're applying to, that title is front and center, so that when the hiring manager sees it, they immediately think, oh, there's a fit here. Let me read a little bit further. And then some important things to customize are the keywords. So what keywords are important for one position will be differently weighted for another. And you always want to make sure that the ones that are the most important come first and they're at the top. So when you have that little keyword section on your resume, you want to make sure that the most relevant ones are at the top. And then when you get into your work experience section, you want to reorder your bullets. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to rewrite it with every resume, but you want to make sure that the most relevant ones are first. The accomplishments, the successes, the things that are most needed in that particular position or company, those are at the top. And then you can order them down, the less important at the bottom.
Right. An employer is going to read it like an ingredient box, more or less, where the first ingredient is the where is going to have the most of the ingredients within the whole list of ingredients.
Yeah, that's right. That's fairly good. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
So, you know, yeah, because there's a lot of thoughts out there still after all of these years of hearing you and many, many others say you should customize it per job, that they say that there are people who are getting results because they don't necessarily customize it per job. And I think that's okay. And that's not completely wrong if it's worked for you.
Yeah,
But if it
absolutely.
stops working for you,
Then you know what you need to do.
then you know you need to take the next step. And that goes to say, I think for a lot of the career advice that's given overall, is that if there's something that you've done for many years and it's worked, it's not going to be wrong until it stops working. Then you've got to stop and pivot and swivel somewhere to do something else. And it may mean more work.
Yep. And I think a lot of the advice to customize too comes from a place where we as resume writers and career experts have seen so many people with generalized resumes that were like a jack of all trades. You know, they could do 5 different jobs and they're trying to cram it all into one resume, you know, and in an effort to help those people realize that you really need to niche yourself to a particular position on your resume. I think that's where that advice started flowing, and then seeing the market change and employers looking more for specialists, for experts in one particular area. It doesn't mean that you can't have experience and expertise in all these other places. It just means that it needs to be focused in that resume on that one particular position.
Sure, sure. And even as a business owner, even though you specialize in one thing, that doesn't mean you still don't need to learn how to um, do a video and even, edit it yourself, or do audio or podcast like mine. And I edit for myself. And a lot of those skills, though you may become an expert, doesn't mean that that's where your focus will need now to
Yes.
expand. It's just it's a sub, it's a small part of your business that you need to, because marketing is a big part of your business.
Yes,
And
that's right.
it's the same thing for a job seeker. Marketing is a big part. So you've got to learn how to do a lot of different things to get to that one point, just to feature that one piece of expertise that you have.
Yep. Yes, you hit the nail on the head perfectly. That is a great way to look at it.
Yeah, but it's a lot of people are, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like when we give this advice over articles, over podcasts, over videos, one-to-one training, speaking, uh, the first thing they think of, that it's too much time. It's too many resources. It's taking up too much of my bandwidth. And so
Yes.
it becomes quite a challenge, and they get really intimidated, but they go back to that one thing. I just want to do this.
Yes. Yep. You are so right. Can I just tell you the overwhelm that people feel at
Yeah,
all the information about resume writing on the internet?
sure.
I promise you, it's like every day someone's like, I don't even know what advice to listen to. There's so much conflicting advice and information out there on the internet. And I know that that has to be frustrating for people when there's so many voices and so much
Mhm.
information, and you don't know who to trust, what to listen to, what advice is going to work best for you. And yeah, I think that's exactly where people get intimidated and overwhelmed and end up throwing their hands up in frustration because they don't know, what's best for them and how to articulate all that and what advice to listen to.
Yeah, yeah. It could be kind of tough, and there's a lot of bandwidth, but don't let that stall your moving forward.
Yeah,
Try
so agree.
something, or try some things. If it doesn't work, go to the next thing.
Yes. Yeah, trial and error it. And then also, find thought leaders and voices that you admire and that resonate with you. And then
Mhm.
follow their advice as opposed to trying to listen to 20 or 30 different people and incorporate all the little pieces here and there. Sometimes it's good to just focus in on one or two voices that you really resonate with, that you admire, and then follow their advice and see how that works.
Yeah, yeah. It's not on the outline that I sent you, but I would like to talk a little bit about resume versus your LinkedIn profile,
Sure.
because that often comes up.
Yeah.
Um, and I know that there are a lot of different thoughts out there, but I think people are getting a clearer picture on that your resume shouldn't sound like your LinkedIn profile, and your LinkedIn profile shouldn't sound like your resume. That doesn't mean they don't have similar components,
That's right.
but they shouldn't tell the same exact story. You don't want chapter one to sound exactly like chapter two in your story.
Yep. And I think a lot of people get caught up in that because they worry that if their LinkedIn profile doesn't mirror their resume, an employer is going to think that they're hiding something or that they're not being truthful on their resume. I have heard that from a lot of people.
Mhm.
Well, if it's not the same, then they're going to think that I'm not giving them correct information or that I'm misleading, and that's not the case at all. Actually, employers will tell you they're going to LinkedIn to find out more about you, not the exact same thing that's on your resume. They're going to find out more. So that's what you want to give them. You want to give them the more that they're not getting on your resume.
Yeah, the I think the operative word has always been for me intrigue. Intrigue
Yeah.
them.
Yep.
Pique their interest on resume, intrigue them with the LinkedIn profile. You'll have a better chance to impress them when they meet you.
Yep, that's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's an argument that just keeps coming up.
Yes.
And how much experience should someone put? I was talking to a client yesterday, and he went back all the way to 1994.
Ooh.
Like, oh God, no. But having and well, we won't go into the grave details, but it was too much. It was way too
Yes.
much. It was a lot of jobs in between there, and it was only at each job 3 or 4 years. So
Oh, that would be a lot of positions
that'd be a
too.
lot of positions. So succinct. What does succinct mean on LinkedIn as far as your jobs and what you should list?
Yeah, so I probably wouldn't go back any more than 15 years. I would try to keep it around 10. And
Hmm.
then you can group together now, especially if you've had multiple positions under one company, they group that information
Hmm.
together. But I think for keyword usage, especially, it's important to list out all those different positions and position titles and companies. And it's not necessarily the length. I think it's more what you're including in each, or not how many positions there are necessarily, but what you're putting, the information that you're putting under each position. And you don't have to go into your entire life story either.
Right. Well, the longer it gets, the
Mm-hmm.
more question of relevance is going to become,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you get to job titles and experience, because you know, Susan Joyce brought this up on the show that management information systems is no longer used.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's different terms that are being used now. You use
Yep.
management information systems. That means you're 1995 to 1999, which is a long time
Yeah,
ago.
and you're probably safe to leave that off. Yeah.
Yeah,
I get what you're
yeah.
I get what you're
Well,
saying.
yeah, but even more so, even if it was 5 years ago, let's say you work in cybersecurity, their terms change very quickly when it comes to technology. Even if you're a year behind, it,
Mhm.
that's light years to employers.
Yeah, I don't think that means that you necessarily need to leave off positions that you had 5 years ago. I think that those
No,
accomplishments and successes are still
right,
vitally important to show
right,
those things. But I think, to your point, keeping that information updated on your resume and your LinkedIn profile is really important. I was actually just doing a video this morning about that very thing, because so many people are going 3, 5, 10, 15 years without updating their resume,
hmm,
without updating their LinkedIn profile. And then now in the market that we're in, somebody comes knocking on the door and says, hey, I have this great C-level role, or I have this great opportunity. Are you interested? And then they're trying to remember stuff from 10 years ago,
there
that
you
would make
go.
a great impression on their resume and would really resonate with employers. And they can't remember the details.
Right,
They can't
right,
remember the dates, the experience, the successes. And it's to their career detriment. Like they could probably excel so much further in their career if they kept up to date with that information. And it doesn't take a lot. It's just inputting a success when you have it on your LinkedIn profile that is relevant, or
hmm,
every 6 months sitting and adding all of those great successes and wins to your master resume file. It
yeah.
doesn't take but a couple of minutes.
And probably that's the best reference point. LinkedIn isn't going to go anywhere real soon, but there's that small section down at the bottom where it has like publications, certifications, awards, and honors, and all those. Those are great places to fill that in, Susan. So when you're
Yes.
ready to write your resume, you can
Yep.
just use that as a reference, and it's right there.
Yep. And it's so much easier to remember it in the time when it's going on, when it's just happened, than it is to sit back, 3 years later and think, now, what was that again? Like, where was I
Right,
published? What did I do?
right.
And it makes me sad how many people are missing opportunities because they're not keeping track of those things.
Yeah, because if you're putting that in your LinkedIn profile, just think those are keywords that add to
That's right.
your ability to get more views and get more people to see you,
Mhm.
and for them to come knock on your door.
That's exactly right. And you may not even be looking, but that doesn't mean that there's not a better position out there that you might look and say, wow, that's really my dream job, and you may not be out looking, but they may find you and they may come and talk to you. And, who would turn down a better opportunity with a better company to make more money and do what they love? I mean,
Right. Well, we discussed some of the resume trends, of course, for 2019, and I think we went through quite a few of them, though. But
Yeah.
Jessica, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, you're so
If,
welcome.
if
It was
people
my
want to,
pleasure.
yeah, so if people want to know more about you and know more about your company and what you do, how can they follow you?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn or they can look me up online at greatresumesfast.com.
Fantastic. Well, Jessica Hernandez, everyone, and thank you very much for coming on the show once again. And thank you guys for listening to the show. If you want to know more about me, podcasts, what I do, articles, more podcasts, some video, I think this will be a video, hopefully, if everything turns out well. And again, thank you for listening. Hope you subscribe, and we'll see you next time in a couple of weeks. Have a great day and a great week.